Man finds his face on a wanted poster, then learns his entire life has been a lie. The morning started like any other Tuesday in Millbrook. I grabbed my usual coffee from Henderson's Cafe, exchanged pleasantries with Mrs. Chen about her grandson's soccer game, and walked the familiar 3 blocks to Millbrook Elementary where I'd been teaching 4th grade for the past 8 years. The October air carried that crisp bite that made me pull my jacket tighter, and the maple trees lining Main Street had begun their annual transformation into a canvas of gold and crimson. It was 7:45 a.m. when I first saw it. The community bulletin board outside the post office had always been a cluttered mess of yard sale announcements, babysitting ads, and lost pet flyers. I rarely paid attention to it, but something made me stop that morning. Maybe it was the way the early sunlight hit the faded paper, or maybe it was fate playing its cruel hand. There, pinned between a notice about the annual pumpkin festival and someone's plea to find their missing tabby cat, was a hand-drawn poster that made my blood freeze in my veins. Missing Samuel last seen, October 15, 1992, age when disappeared, 6 months old. Below the desperate plea was a sketch, not a photograph, but a carefully detailed pencil drawing of a baby's face. Round cheeks, a small nose, eyes that seemed to look right through me. But it was the birthmark that made my knees go weak. A small, crescent-shaped mark just below the left ear. The same mark I'd carried my entire life, the one my mother always said made me special. My hands trembled as I reached up to touch my neck, feeling the familiar raised skin that had been my companion since childhood. The drawing was old, the paper yellowed with age, but the desperate love in every pencil stroke was unmistakable. At the bottom, in fading ink, was a phone number and the words, "Please, if you have any information about our Samuel, call us. We never stopped looking. We never stopped loving you." I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, staring at this impossible thing. People walked past me, the mailman, some joggers, a mother pushing a stroller, but they all seemed like shadows. The only real thing in the world was this poster, and the growing certainty in my gut that something fundamental about my life was wrong. "Ethan? You okay, son?" I jerked around to find Mr. Davidson, the retired postmaster, looking at me with concern. His weathered face creased with worry as he noticed my pale complexion. I'm fine," I managed, though my voice sounded strange even to my own ears. "This poster, how long has it been here?" Mr. Davidson squinted at the board, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Oh, that old thing? Showed up maybe 2 weeks ago. Sad story, that is. Some family's been looking for their baby for over 30 years. Can you imagine? Never giving up hope like that. 2 weeks. The poster had been here for 2 weeks, and I'd never noticed it. But then again, I usually rushed past this corner, focused on getting to school on time, grading papers, planning lessons. The mundane routine of a life I'd never questioned. "Do you know who put it up?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Can't say for sure. Could have been anyone passing through town. We don't really monitor the community board too closely." He studied my face more carefully. "You sure you're all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Maybe I had. The school day passed in a blur. I went through the motions, teaching math, supervising lunch, reading story time, but my mind kept drifting back to that poster. Every time I caught my reflection in the classroom windows or the bathroom mirror, I found myself studying my features with new eyes. The nose, the chin, the shape of my eyes. Had I always looked this way, or was I seeing resemblances that weren't really there? During my lunch break, I walked back to the post office, telling myself I was being ridiculous. The poster would still be there, and in daylight, I'd realize how foolish I was being. Thousands of babies probably had similar birthmarks. The drawing was generic enough that it could match dozens of men my age. But when I reached the bulletin board, my heart sank. The poster was gone. I searched every inch of that board, moving aside notices and advertisements, hoping it had just been covered up or moved. Nothing. It had vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared. "Looking for something?" Mrs. Patterson, the librarian, approached with an armload of book return notices to pin up. There was a missing person poster here this morning. Hand-drawn. About someone named Samuel? She frowned thoughtfully. I update this board every Tuesday morning, take down the old stuff. If there was something there, it might have been too faded to read properly. We have to make room for current announcements, you know. What do you do with the old postings? Trash bin behind the building. Though it was picked up this morning, so... She shrugged apologetically. I spent my entire prep period digging through every dumpster and trash can within a 3-block radius. Nothing. It was as if the poster had never existed, except for the image burned into my memory and the growing unease in my chest. That afternoon, I tried to focus on my students' presentations about their family heritage projects. Jenny talked about her great-grandmother who came from Ireland. Marcus shared photos of his father's military service. Each child beamed with pride as they connected themselves to their family's story, to a history that stretched back generations. When had I last done a family tree project? I tried to remember, but the memories felt strangely fuzzy. My parents had always been vague about our extended family. Just us, my mother would say with a smile when I asked about grandparents or aunts and uncles. We're all we need. As I walked home that evening, I found myself taking a different route, one that led past the grocery store, the pharmacy, and a small park where families brought their children to play. And there it was again. Not the same poster, but another one, this time taped to a lamp post near the swings. The same desperate plea, the same haunting sketch, but this one looked newer, the paper crisper. Someone was actively putting these up around town. This time, I carefully peeled it from the post and folded it into my jacket pocket. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and dialed the number at the bottom of the poster. It rang once. Twice. On the third ring, a woman's voice answered, breathless with hope. Hello? Do you have information about Samuel? The raw desperation in her voice hit me like a physical blow. Here was a mother who had spent 32 years hoping for this exact phone call, and I was about to either give her the miracle she'd been praying for or deliver another crushing disappointment. I started, then stopped. What was I supposed to say? That I might be her son based on a birthmark and a gut feeling that my life wasn't what it seemed. Please, she continued, her voice breaking slightly. Any information at all. We've never stopped looking. We've never stopped believing he's out there. I closed my eyes, touching the birthmark on my neck one more time. 32 years old. Born in 1992. The math was impossible to ignore. My name is Ethan, I said slowly. Ethan Morrison. And I think I might be Samuel. The silence on the other end was deafening. Then, barely above a whisper. Can you describe your birthmark? Crescent-shaped. Below my left ear. About the size of a quarter. The sob that came through the phone was a sound I'd never forget. Pure joy mixed with decades of pain finally finding release. Oh God, she breathed. Oh my God, it's really you. Samuel, baby, is it really you? But even as she spoke, even as my heart hammered with the impossibility of it all, one question burned in my mind. If I really was Samuel, then who were Jim and Linda Morrison? And why had they spent my entire life calling themselves my parents? The ground beneath my feet felt less solid with each passing second, as if everything I'd believed about myself was built on shifting sand. Tomorrow, I would have to go home and ask the two people I loved most in the world to explain why their son's face was on missing person posters all over town. I had the terrible feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. The drive home felt like the longest 15 minutes of my life. Every familiar landmark, the old oak tree where I'd built a treehouse at 10, the corner where I'd learned to ride a bike, the house where my first girlfriend lived, seemed to mock me with their false sense of belonging. Had any of it ever really been mine? My parents' house sat at the end of Maple Drive, a cozy 2-story colonial with white shutters and my mother's prized rose garden lining the front walkway. I'd grown up in this house, played in that yard, carved my initials in the wooden fence when I was 12 and got grounded for a week. But now, as I sat in my car staring at it, the house felt like a stranger's home. The porch light was on, casting a warm yellow glow that usually made me feel safe and welcome. Tonight, it felt like a spotlight illuminating 32 years of lies. I found my parents in the living room, exactly where they always were at 7 p.m. Dad in his worn leather recliner, reading glasses perched on his nose as he worked through the evening crossword. Mom curled up on the sofa with her latest mystery novel, a cup of chamomile tea cooling on the coffee table beside her. The picture of domestic tranquility. "Ethan!" Mom's face lit up as I walked in. "What a nice surprise. Have you eaten? I made that chicken casserole you like." Linda Morrison was 62 years old. With silver-streaked hair she kept in a neat bob and kind eyes that crinkled when she smiled. She'd been the room mother for every class trip, the one who stayed up all night sewing my Halloween costumes, who cried harder than I did when I graduated college. Looking at her now, I couldn't reconcile this loving woman with someone who could steal a child. "I'm not hungry," I said, my voice coming out sharper than intended. Dad looked up from his crossword, sensing something wrong. Jim Morrison was a man of few words but deep perception. At 65, he still carried himself with the straight-backed posture of his army days, though his thick brown hair had gone completely gray. He taught me to throw a baseball, helped with every science project, walked me down the aisle when I got my teaching degree because he said education was the most important gift anyone could give. "Everything all right, son?" he asked, setting down his pen. The word son hit me like a physical blow. I pulled the poster from my jacket pocket, unfolding it with trembling hands. "I found this today," I said, placing it on the coffee table between us. The reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Mom's teacup slipped from her fingers, sending chamomile tea across her book. Dad's face went pale, his jaw clenching the way it did when he was trying to control his emotions. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "Where did you find this?" Dad asked quietly, his eyes never leaving the poster. "Around town. There are more of them. Someone's been putting them up for weeks." I studied their faces, looking for any sign of innocence, any indication that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. "The birthmark matches mine exactly." Mom finally looked up, and I saw something I'd never seen in her eyes before: fear. Pure, desperate fear. "Ethan, honey, there are probably thousands of people with similar birthmarks. This is just a coincidence." But even as she said it, she was avoiding my gaze, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her cardigan. Dad wasn't even attempting to look innocent anymore. He sat rigid in his chair, staring at the poster like it was a snake ready to strike. "Is it, Mom?" I pressed, feeling my voice rise despite my efforts to stay calm. "Because I called the number. I spoke to a woman who's been looking for her nephew Samuel for 32 years. She knew about my birthmark before I even described it." "You called them?" Dad's voice was sharp, almost angry. "Ethan, you don't understand what you're doing. These people, you don't know what kind of situation you might be walking into." "What situation, Dad? What exactly don't I understand?" They exchanged a look, one of those wordless conversations that couples have after decades of marriage. But this time, instead of the loving understanding I'd always admired, I saw something else. Guilt. Conspiracy. A shared secret that was finally clawing its way to the surface. "The photos," I said suddenly, noticing what I hadn't before. "Where are all the baby pictures?" Mom's breath caught audibly. I looked around the living room, really looked, and realized that all the family photos that usually covered the mantel and side tables were gone. Decades of carefully curated memories had vanished overnight. "You took them down," I whispered. "You knew this day would come, and you took them down." "Ethan, please," Mom started, tears beginning to stream down her cheeks. "Please just sit down and let us explain." "Explain what? That my entire life has been a lie? That somewhere out there is a family who's been searching for me while you've been pretending I belong here?" Dad stood up abruptly, his military bearing cracking for the first time in my memory. "We never pretended anything. You do belong here. You're our son in every way that matters. But not biologically. Not legally." Not really. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Mom was sobbing now, her careful composure completely shattered. Dad looked older than I'd ever seen him, as if the weight of 32 years was finally crushing down on his shoulders. "We didn't adopt you," he said quietly, each word measured and heavy. "We found you. And we couldn't let you go." The room spun around me. Found me? What did that even mean? I sank into the nearest chair, my legs suddenly unable to support my weight. "What do you mean, you found me?" Mom wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. "I was working at the Pine Valley Clinic then. It was October 1992, and there was this terrible storm." "Linda, don't," Dad warned, but she shook her head. "No, Jim. He deserves to know the truth. We always said we'd tell him someday, and someday is here." She looked at me with eyes full of 32 years of love and regret. "A woman brought you to the clinic that night. She was young, scared, clearly in some kind of trouble. She said she couldn't take care of you anymore, that you deserved better. Then she just left. So you kept me. Just like that. We just lost our own baby," Dad said softly. "A miscarriage at 7 months. Linda we were both destroyed. When this perfect little boy appeared, it felt like a miracle. Like you were meant to be ours. But you never reported it. Never tried to find my real family. We convinced ourselves we were protecting you," Mom whispered. "That woman was running from something dangerous. We thought you were safer with us." I stood up, pacing to the window, trying to process what they were telling me. Outside, the neighborhood looked exactly the same as it had an hour ago, but I felt like I was seeing it from another planet. 32 years, I said, not turning around. 32 years, and you never once thought to tell me the truth." The silence behind me was answer enough. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that poster, heard the desperate hope in that woman's voice on the phone, felt the weight of my parents' confession settling into my bones like lead. By 6 a.m., I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, staring at my laptop screen. I'd spent the night researching everything I could about missing children from 1992, about the Pine Valley Clinic, about what happens when babies disappear without a trace. The statistics were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of children went missing every year, most found within hours, but some vanished forever, leaving behind families who never stopped searching, never stopped hoping. Like the woman on the phone. Like Samuel's family. I called in sick to work, the first time I'd done so in 3 years, and drove to Pine Valley. The clinic was 40 minutes outside Millbrook, nestled in a valley between rolling hills that were painted gold and red with autumn colors. Under different circumstances, the drive would have been beautiful. The Pine Valley Clinic was smaller than I'd expected, a modest building that looked like it had been expanded several times over the decades. A newer wing housed modern equipment, but the original structure still carried the weathered charm of its 1980s construction. I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, gathering courage. What was I hoping to find? Records from 30 years ago? Some smoking gun that would make everything clear? The truth was, I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew I couldn't move forward without trying to understand what really happened that stormy night in October 1992. The receptionist was friendly but apologetic. "Patient records from that far back? Oh honey, we digitized everything about 10 years ago, but anything older than 20 years got archived. You need to speak with Dr. Hartley. He's been here since the beginning." Dr. Hartley was in his 70s, with gentle eyes and hands that shook slightly as he poured coffee in his office. "Linda Morrison," he said thoughtfully. "Of course I remember Linda. One of the best nurses I ever worked with. Dedicated, compassionate. She left us quite suddenly, though. Right after." He trailed off, studying my face more carefully. "After what, Dr. Hartley? You look familiar. Have we met before?" I explained who I was, why I was there. His expression grew more troubled with each word. "October 15th, 1992, he said slowly. "I remember that night. One of the worst storms we'd had in years. Power was out for hours. He moved to a filing cabinet, pulling out a thick folder. I keep the unusual cases in hard copy. Old habit, I suppose. My heart pounded as he opened the folder, revealing handwritten notes and incident reports from 3 decades ago. There was a young woman who came in that night. He continued, reading from his notes. No identification, no insurance information. She was in distress, not physically injured, but clearly frightened. Kept looking over her shoulder like someone might be following her. What happened to her? She stayed for about an hour, in one of our private rooms. Said she was waiting for someone, needed to make some calls. Linda was working the night shift. She offered to sit with her, bring her some food. His voice grew quieter. Then around 3 a.m., I heard raised voices from that room. Raised voices? The woman was agitated, pacing. Linda was trying to calm her down. I was dealing with another patient, so I didn't intervene immediately. When I finally checked on them, he paused, looking uncomfortable. The woman was gone. Linda said she'd left suddenly, said she couldn't wait any longer. And the baby? Dr. Hartley's face grew grim. That's where the story gets complicated. Linda told me the woman had taken the baby with her. But when I reviewed the security footage the next day, we only had one camera then, at the main entrance. I saw the woman leave alone. The room felt like it was spinning. She left alone? Linda insisted I was mistaken, that the angle made it hard to see. She was emotional about it. Said the whole situation reminded her of her own recent loss. He closed the folder, meeting my eyes directly. I should have pressed harder. Should have filed a report. But Linda was grieving, and I thought maybe I really had missed seeing the child in the footage. But you didn't miss it, did you? He shook his head slowly. I've regretted not acting on my instincts for 30 years. That woman came back, you know. About a week later. She was desperate, asking if anyone had seen her baby. Said she'd made a mistake leaving him behind, that she'd come back for him, but he was gone. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, creating a picture that made my stomach churn. What did you tell her? Linda wasn't working that day. I told the woman I'd check our records, but there was no record of any baby being left behind. Officially, it never happened. His voice was heavy with regret. She came back several more times over the next few months, always asking the same questions. Then she stopped coming. Do you remember her name? She never gave her real name, I don't think. But one of the times she came back, she was with an older woman, her sister maybe. They were putting up flyers around town, asking about the missing baby. The sister called her Elena. Elena. My birth mother had a name. Dr. Hartley, I said carefully. Do you think Linda took that baby? He was quiet for a long moment, staring out his office window at the hills beyond. I think Linda was a woman destroyed by grief who saw a miracle and convinced herself it was meant to be. I think she rationalized taking that child by believing she was saving him from whatever his mother was running from. And you never reported your suspicions? To my eternal shame, no. Linda was like family to us here. And the baby, wherever he ended up, he was clearly being well cared for. I told myself that was what mattered. He looked at me with eyes full of 3 decades of guilt. But seeing you here now, knowing that woman never stopped looking, I realize how wrong I was to stay silent. I left the clinic with copies of the incident reports and a heavy heart. The drive home gave me time to process what I'd learned. My parents, the people who'd raised me with love and devotion, had made a choice that night that destroyed another family. They'd convinced themselves they were saving me, but they'd stolen someone else's miracle. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Can we talk? Please come home. But I wasn't ready to face them yet. There was one more call I needed to make first. I pulled over at a rest stop and dialed the number from the poster. Hello? The same hopeful voice from yesterday. It's Ethan, I said. Samuel. We need to meet. The Sunset Diner on Route 9 was the kind of place where truckers stopped for coffee and pie, where vinyl booths had seen decades of conversations both mundane and life-changing. I arrived 15 minutes early, my palms sweating as I claimed a corner booth with a view of the parking lot. Every car that pulled in made my heart race. At exactly 2 p.m., an older Honda Civic parked near the entrance. I watched as two people emerged, a woman in her late 50s with graying brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, and a man about the same age with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of a lifetime of honest work. They stood by their car for a moment, holding hands, gathering courage just as I was. The woman spotted me first. I don't know how she knew, maybe it was the birthmark visible above my collar, or maybe it was something deeper, some invisible thread that connects family even across decades of separation. Her hand flew to her mouth, and she said something to the man beside her. He nodded, squeezed her hand, and together they walked toward the diner. I stood as they approached my booth, my legs unsteady. Up close, I could see the resemblance that had been hidden in old sketches and desperate hope. The woman had my nose, the same shape to her eyebrows. The man's smile, tentative but warm, reminded me of my own. "Samuel?" the woman whispered, as if saying the name too loudly might make me disappear. "Ethan," I corrected gently. "But yes. I think I'm Samuel too." She collapsed into the booth across from me, tears streaming down her face. The man, her husband I assumed, sat beside her, his own eyes wet but his composure stronger. "I'm Maria Santos," she said through her tears. "This is my husband, Paul. And you? God, you look just like her." "Like who?" "Your mother. My sister Elena." She pulled a worn photograph from her purse, sliding it across the Formica table. The image was faded but clear, a young woman, maybe 20, with dark hair and eyes that sparkled with mischief and joy. But it was the face that made me gasp, the same face I saw in the mirror every morning, softened by femininity but unmistakably familiar. "She was beautiful," I said softly. "She was spirited," Paul added with a sad smile. "Always getting into some kind of trouble, but with the biggest heart. She loved you more than anything in this world." Maria nodded, pulling out more photos. "Look, here she is when she was pregnant with you. She was so excited, even though things were complicated then." The photo showed Elena cradling her pregnant belly, beaming at the camera despite what looked like difficult circumstances. She was thin, too thin, and there were dark circles under her eyes. But her smile was radiant. "What happened to her?" I asked, though part of me dreaded the answer. Maria's face crumbled. "She got involved with the wrong people when she was 19. Drugs, bad relationships. When she found out she was pregnant, she tried so hard to get clean, but..." She wiped her eyes with a paper napkin. "She was scared. The father was dangerous, part of some drug operation. When you were born, she knew she had to run. That's why she went to the clinic. She was trying to get away from him, start fresh. But she was young and scared and made some bad choices." Paul's voice was gentle but pained. "She told us later that she left you at the clinic because she thought you'd be safer there while she figured out how to disappear completely. She was going to come back for you once she had a safe place to go. But when she came back, I was gone." Maria nodded, fresh tears falling. "She was destroyed. Absolutely destroyed. She spent years looking for you, going to every hospital, every police station, every social services office. She hired private detectives when she could afford them, put up flyers in every town within 100 miles. She never stopped looking," Paul continued. "Even when everyone told her to give up, that you were probably with a good family somewhere. She'd say, 'He's my baby. He needs to know his mama loves him.'" I felt my own tears starting, a grief for a mother I'd never known mixing with anger at the people who'd kept us apart. Is she still alive?" The silence that followed was deafening. Maria reached across the table and took my hand in hers. "She died 8 years ago," she said softly. "Car accident. She was coming back from putting up new flyers in a town about 60 miles north of here. She never married, never had other children. You were her whole world, Samuel. Even the day she died, she had your baby picture in her wallet. The weight of loss I'd never known I carried suddenly crushed down on me. A mother who'd loved me, searched for me, died believing I was lost forever. And I'd been just 40 minutes away, living a life built on the ashes of her heartbreak. She would have been so happy to know you're okay. Maria continued, squeezing my hand. You grew up to be exactly what she dreamed, kind, educated, someone who helps children. She would have been so proud. I want to know everything about her, I said through my tears. Every story, every memory. I want to know who she was. We have photo albums, home videos, letters she wrote but never sent because she didn't know where you were, Paul said. We kept everything, hoping someday we'd find you, Maria finished. Elena made us promise we'd never stop looking. Even after she died, we kept putting up posters, kept hoping. We have a whole family who's been waiting to meet you, Samuel. Cousins, aunts, uncles. Elena talked about you so much over the years that they all feel like they know you already. I thought about Jim and Linda Morrison, the people who'd raised me with love but built that love on a foundation of lies. I thought about Elena Santos, who died still searching for her stolen son. The two truths of my existence seemed impossible to reconcile. I don't know how to do this, I admitted. I don't know how to be Samuel when I've been Ethan my whole life. Maria smiled through her tears, the first real smile I'd seen from her. You don't have to choose, honey. You can be both. Elena would want you to be happy, to keep the good parts of the life you built. She just would have wanted to be part of it. As we sat in that diner, sharing stories and tears, I felt something I had never experienced before, the recognition of belonging to something larger than myself. But even as I embraced this new family, I knew the hardest conversations still lay ahead. I had to go home and face the people who'd loved me enough to steal me, and somehow find a way to build a future that honored both my past and the family who never stopped believing I'd come home. 3 days passed before I found the courage to return to Maple Drive. 3 days of sleepless nights, of staring at Elena's photographs, of trying to reconcile the loving parents who'd raised me with the people who'd destroyed another family's life. Maria had given me a box of Elena's things, letters she'd written to me over the years, a baby blanket she'd knitted while pregnant, the worn wallet she'd carried with my infant picture until the day she died. The house looked different when I finally pulled into the driveway. Smaller somehow, as if the weight of truth had compressed its very foundations. The rose garden Mom had tended for decades seemed wilted despite the autumn blooms, and the white shutters needed paint I'd never noticed before. I found them in the kitchen, sitting at the breakfast table where we'd shared thousands of meals together. They looked like they'd aged years in the past few days. Dad's hair seemed grayer, Mom's face drawn and hollow. Between them lay a manila folder thick with papers. Ethan, Mom said softly as I entered. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying for hours. Thank God you came home. I remained standing, keeping the kitchen island between us like a barrier. Is that what this is? Home? Dad flinched as if I'd struck him. This will always be your home, son. No matter what happens, no matter what you've learned, you'll always belong here. Do I? Because I spent the afternoon going through Elena Santos's things. The mother who died 8 years ago still looking for her stolen baby. I pulled out the photograph Maria had given me, Elena holding my infant picture, taken just months before her death. She never stopped hoping she'd find me. Mom's sob was a broken sound that cut through the kitchen silence. Dad reached for her hand, but she pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. We know, she whispered. We've always known. The simple admission hit me harder than anger or denials would have. They'd known. For 32 years, they'd known about Elena's search, about a mother's dying hope, and they'd said nothing. How? I asked. Dad opened the manila folder, revealing newspaper clippings, printed emails, and what looked like surveillance photos. We monitored the missing person reports. Watched for any signs that someone was getting close to finding you. You watched her search for me? We had to, Mom said, her voice barely audible. We had to know if, If anyone was going to take you away from us. I stared at the evidence of their deception, years of deliberate, calculated choices to keep me from my birth family. This wasn't a moment of grief-stricken impulse. This was sustained, premeditated isolation. There's more, Dad said quietly. He pulled out a letter, handwritten on clinic letterhead. Dr. Hartley wrote this 5 years after you came to us. He threatened to go to the police unless we came forward. What did you do? We told him we'd already contacted the authorities, that you were part of an unofficial adoption arrangement, Mom said. We lied to him too. And when Elena died? When the search finally ended? Dad's hands trembled as he closed the folder. We thought it was over. That we could finally stop looking over our shoulders, stop being afraid that someday there'd be a knock on our door. But there was, I said. Yesterday. Maria Santos called. She wanted to meet the parents who raised her nephew, to thank them for taking care of Elena's boy. The color drained from Mom's face. You told them about us. I told them the truth. That two people who loved me very much made choices that destroyed another family. I pulled out a chair and finally sat down, exhaustion overwhelming my anger. They want to meet you. We can't, Mom said immediately. Ethan, they'll want to press charges. We could go to prison. No, I said firmly. They won't. You know why? Because Elena made them promise something before she died. She made them swear that if they ever found me, they wouldn't seek revenge against whoever took me. She said her only concern was that I was safe and loved. Silence filled the kitchen like fog. Outside, I could hear the neighbor's dog barking, children playing in the distance, normal sounds of a normal evening in a neighborhood where nothing was normal anymore. Why? I asked finally. Why couldn't you have just adopted me properly? Gone through official channels? Mom looked up, her eyes red and swollen. Because then they would have looked for your birth family. There would have been investigations, questions. We knew what we'd done was wrong, but by then you were ours. You were our miracle, and we couldn't bear the thought of losing you. So instead, Elena lost everything. Yes, Dad said simply. And we've carried that guilt every day since. Every birthday party, every Christmas morning, every proud moment watching you grow up, it was all shadowed by knowing what we'd cost another family. Then why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you give me the choice? Because you would have left, Mom said through fresh tears. You would have gone to find them, and we were selfish. We wanted to keep you as long as we could. I reached across the table and took both their hands in mine. They felt smaller than I remembered, more fragile, like the hands of people who'd been carrying an impossible weight for too long. I'm not leaving, I said quietly. But things have to change. Maria and Paul want to meet you. Elena's extended family wants to know the people who raised her son. We're going to have to figure out how to make this work. Dad squeezed my hand. We'll do whatever you need us to do. Good, I said. Because tomorrow, we're all going to plant a tree. The Millbrook Memorial Park had been Elena's favorite place as a child, according to Maria. It was where she'd learned to ride a bike, where she'd brought bread to feed the ducks, where she dreamed about the future she'd never get to see. It seemed fitting that we'd gather there to honor her memory and plant something that would grow beyond all of our lifetimes. I arrived early that Saturday morning, carrying a young maple sapling Maria and I had chosen together, strong roots, brilliant autumn colors, the kind of tree that could weather any storm. The morning air was crisp, painted with the promise of winter, but the sun broke through the clouds as if offering its blessing on what we were about to do. Maria and Paul arrived first, followed by a caravan of cars that made my heart skip. I'd expected them to bring a few family members, but watching person after person emerge from vehicles, I realized this was Elena's entire extended family. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends who'd helped search for me over the years. At least 20 people, all carrying pieces of a life I'd never known but somehow belonged to. We wanted everyone to meet you, Maria explained, her eyes bright with tears and joy. Elena talked about you so much that you're already part of all their stories. The introductions were overwhelming in the most beautiful way. Cousin Isabella, who'd helped make flyers in high school. Uncle Roberto, who'd driven hundreds of miles following false leads. Aunt Carmen, who'd lit candles for me every Sunday at church for 3 decades. Each face, each embrace, each "We've been waiting so long to meet you," added another layer to an identity I was still learning to inhabit. Then I saw my parents' car pull into the parking lot, and my stomach clenched with nervous energy. Mom and Dad sat in their Honda for several minutes before getting out, their faces pale but resolute. They dressed carefully for this moment, Dad in his good navy suit, Mom in the blue dress she wore to church. They looked like they were attending a funeral, which in some ways they were. The silence when they approached was deafening. 20 members of Elena's family faced the 2 people who'd stolen their hope for 32 years. I stood between the groups, feeling like a bridge that might collapse under the weight of so much pain and love. Maria stepped forward first. She was smaller than my mother, but she carried herself with a dignity that made her seem taller. For a moment, the 2 women simply stared at each other, the sister who never stopped searching and the mother who never stopped hiding. "You raised him well," Maria said quietly. "Elena would be grateful for that." Mom's composure cracked completely. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "We're so sorry. We know we can never make up for what we took from your family." "No," Paul said, stepping beside his wife. "You can't. But Samuel, Ethan, he's here now. He's healthy and good and everything Elena dreamed he'd become. That's what matters to us." Dad found his voice then, the military bearing that had sustained him through decades of guilt finally steadying his words. "We were wrong. There's no excuse for what we did, no justification that makes it right. But we loved him. We've loved him every day since the moment we brought him home. We know," said Uncle Roberto, surprising everyone. "We can see it in how he turned out. Our Elena, she always said she just wanted her baby to be loved. You gave him that." What followed was the most extraordinary thing I'd ever witnessed. Instead of accusations and anger, stories began to flow. Maria told my parents about Elena's laugh, how she'd sing off-key lullabies and dance around the kitchen. Mom shared memories of my first steps, my first words, the way I'd insisted on wearing my Superman cape to grocery stores until I was 7. As we dug the hole for the maple sapling, people from both families worked side by side. Dad and Paul found common ground in their shared military service. Mom and Aunt Carmen discovered they both loved mystery novels. Cousin Isabella showed me pictures of Elena as a teenager, while I shared stories of soccer games and science fairs my parents had cheered through. The tree went into the ground surrounded by 24 hands, each person adding their own shovel of earth. As we watered it together, Uncle Roberto began singing a Spanish lullaby Elena had loved. Mom joined in with a harmony she remembered from her own childhood, and gradually other voices added to the song, English and Spanish, grief and joy, the past and future blending into something neither family could have created alone. Standing there in the afternoon sun, watching the families who'd shaped me work together to nurture something that would outlive us all, I finally understood what Maria had meant in the diner. I didn't have to choose between being Samuel or Ethan. I could be both. I could honor Elena's memory while cherishing the love Jim and Linda had given me. I could belong to both families because love, real love, isn't diminished by being shared. The poster that had started this journey was long gone, but it had served its purpose. It had brought me home, not to one place, but to the understanding that home isn't a location or even a single family. Home is the collection of people who love you, who claim you, who make room in their hearts for all the complicated, messy, beautiful truth of who you are. As the sun set over Millbrook Memorial Park, casting long shadows from our newly planted tree, I knew that Elena Santos could finally rest. Her boy was found, surrounded by love, rooted in truth, and growing toward a future that honored both the life he'd built and the family he'd always belonged to. The story of Samuel Morrison was finally complete.